Welcome back to our class on construction grammar. Today we will take a very quick look at phrasal constructions. Remember, in this course we adopt the definition that constructions are pairings of form and meaning. In our constructionist approach, all levels of description involve these form-meaning pairings, and the knowledge of language in totality is the constructicon. Last time we looked at argument structure constructions, and today we sort of look at the slot fillers of these argument structure constructions, phrasal constructions. Let's start with noun phrase constructions, which are essentially referential constructions. Have a look at the following joke, which admittedly is not very funny. A man walks into a bar and sits down next to a dog. "Does your dog bite?" he asks the barmaid. "No," she replies. A few seconds later, the dog takes a massive bite out of his leg. "I thought you said your dog doesn't bite," the man yells. "It's not my dog," she answers. What you see highlighted in boldface are a lot of noun phrases: a man, the barmaid, and so on. What all of these do is they take a noun, which we said from a cognitive perspective very abstractly can be seen as a thing, a very abstract notion of a bounded entity, and places it in a referential context. So if you just say man, then everyone will say, well, which man are you talking about? Or bar or dog. Now, as you can already see, there are two types of major noun phrases in this joke. A man walks into the bar and the man. What's the difference between the two? If you started the joke with the man walks into the bar, everyone would ask well, which man? The man? How am I supposed to know who you're talking about? And that's exactly what the does. It assumes that your hearer is able to pick out, to identify which man, dog, or thing you're talking about. In contrast to this, if you as a speaker know that the hearer doesn't quite know yet who you're going to talk about, you introduce the noun phrase with an or an. What this indefinite article does is basically signal, well, it's one specific instance of a thing, and I know it, but you may not know this one thing yet. But don't worry, I'm going to tell you about it later. So the two major noun phrase constructions that we have is a definite the noun phrase construction, which has a the as a determiner followed by a noun. The noun denotes a thing, man, bar, dog, and so on. And the tells you it's definite, which signals I, the speaker, assume that you know who we're talking about. If you want to introduce a new noun, a new thing, which the hearer doesn't know yet, then you can use the indefinite NP construction. There you have a or an, depending on whether the following word starts with a vowel or a consonant, followed by a noun, and now it's an indefinite thing construction. Note that in these two representations, as with all representations that we've got in this presentation, we're sort of simplifying. We're breaking it down to the most simple representation we can give to these phrasal constructions. So English definitely has a definite the NP construction and an indefinite a NP construction, which are used because of their different informational structure status in different pragmatic situations. But they're by no means the only NP construction. Things like he, John, my head, John's bike, any some money, all my money are all noun phrases, which already shows you that the whole noun phrase discussion should be way longer. We're going to skip this for now, and maybe I'll get back to this in a later video. For now, it's just important what all these phrasal constructions share is they have a referential construction. They uniquely identify individuals or group of individuals. Let's move on to adjective phrases. Adjectives, we said, are properties, dative properties, and adjective phrases assign these to a potential thing. So you can say he's a really good player, but you can't say he's a really player. But you can say he's a good player. So in really good, good is the more important element. It's a property, it's a thing. So the whole thing is going to be bigger than a single word, and we call this a phrase. This phrase is an adjective phrase because good, the head, is an adjective. Now, adjective phrases in English can either appear in front of a noun, then they are modifiers, they are optional extra stuff that tell you something about the head noun, the player. Or they can also appear in copulative constructions, so if be is the main verb, so the player is really good, the player is good. So how can we schematically represent an adjective phrase? Well, an adjective phrase consists of a pre-modifier slot, so you can have an adverb like really in front of it, or you can just have the adjective. And then the meaning of this is going to be a property, but who or what has got this property? Well, that is actually something that lies outside of the construction. So an adjective construction has a slot for a thing on the meaning level, but that's not necessarily represented on the formal part of the morphosyntax level. Note, however, that some theories, especially formal approaches to construction grammar, have special features which also put something on the morphosyntax level. This is the so-called modifier feature, and for adjective phrases we could, for example, specify that they are modifiers of nouns. Similarly, adverb phrases assign dynamic properties. So, he played. You can enrich this by he played really well. You still can't say he played really, but you can say he played well. So again, our adverb construction has a pre-modifier slot where the really can go into, but it's optional. It necessarily needs an adverb, of course, to be an adverb phrase. And again, this is a property. But what is it a property of? Well, in this case, a predication. It tells you that something behaved well, acted well, that an event was carried out in the fashion that we would describe as well. So here we've got the slot for the predication. In other words, if we wanted a morphosyntactic feature, we could say that adverb phrases are modifiers of clauses, which is of course something that all optional adjuncts basically do. Now let's move on to the verbs and the verb phrase constructions. Tense and aspect are obviously an important part of the English verb phrase. So take a look at he bakes a cake and he is baking a cake. Both of them are present tense. They are supposed to happen at speaking time. But of course, the second one is a present progressive. It's an ongoing action, whereas in the first case, you analyze it as not ongoing, as more stative in a sense. Tense-wise, you can also shift both of these constructions back to the past tense. So when you talk about the event a day later, you could say he baked a cake or he was baking a cake. The difference is still that in the first case, it's sort of completed, and in the second one, it is ongoing. So in our English verb phrase, we've got tense and progressive, and if you look at is and was, you can see that tense comes first, and then that progressive aspect is marked by an extra construction, one that requires a form of to be and an ing present participle. So be baking, either then was baking or is baking, depending on whether you use it in the present or in the past tense. On top of that, we got the present perfect and the past perfect. He has baked a cake and he had baked a cake. They differ slightly in their semantics, but let's just skip over this for now. For us, it is only important that tense also precedes perfect, right? Because the first element is marked for tense, has or had, and then the perfective aspect is marked by a form of have plus the past participle. Finally, you can have a combination, has been baking a cake, which shows you that tense is sort of to the leftmost element, always marked on has, have, was, and so on, and then perfect and progressive are combined. So in has been baking, have plus been is the perfect aspect, and been baking is the progressive aspect. So the two combinations, the two constructions are combined. Finally, we can add future or modal elements. He will bake a cake is future, of course, and he may bake a cake is modality. So this can either be deontic, so you allow someone to bake a cake, you're allowed to bake a cake, or it can mean that someone has the epistemic possibility, that they're in a position to do this. It's likely that they may bake a cake. In the end, you can stack all of this together, though these stacked realizations are not very frequent. But if you look at may have been baking, he may have been baking a cake, what you see is that tense and modality together are on the leftmost edge. Then we've got have and been, which represents perfect aspect, and been and baking, which is progressive aspect. And you can see how been, in this case, is a blend or a nexus of two constructions. It's the grammatical marker, which is part of the progressive aspect, and then it's also in its past participle form because it fills in the verb slot of the perfect aspect. Again, pretty complex, but what you see is that tense, modality, and aspect are sort of combined together in what we call the verbal head complex. So this is something that we need to look at if we want to talk about the tense and aspect of a construction. On top of that, we also have verb phrases, things which are bigger than the verb head complex, and these resemble predication. So you can say he bakes a cake, but you could also say he baked a cake and he ate it. So here the subject, he, is shared between baked a cake and ate it. So there is something which is bigger than a verb, but not a full sentence. And you can also enrich this with optional adjuncts. So you can say he baked a cake yesterday and ate it straight away. All of this leads to the conclusion that we have a finite VP construction. This VP construction necessarily needs a verb head complex, VHC. And then depending on whether it's a transitive verb like bake, you can have all the necessary complements, which are also licensed by the argument structure constructions, as well as any potential adjunct. So yesterday, in his flat yesterday, you could also add that. The whole meaning of the verb phrase is that of predication. And the predication is it tells you something about the topic, the subject of the clause. Again, the topic itself is not included on the morphosyntactic level of the VP construction, but it's outside of it. But again, if you want the formal approach, then of course you could have a morphosyntactic property where you specify that the subject still needs to merge with a VP construction. Finally, prepositional phrases. Prepositional phrases encode figure-ground relationships. What do I mean by this? Well, look at the book is on the table, or the book on the table. And contrast this with the table is under the book and the table under the book. Both of these talk about the book and the table and where they are located, but they differ slightly in the foregrounded element, what you sort of zoom in on in your mental visual representation of this. So in the book is on the table, the book is foregrounded, it's the figure element, and you locate it on the table. 7a is slightly uncommon, but if you picture a scene where the table is under the book and you want to talk about the table and the book is massive or whatever, it's almost hidden, and the table is very small, then you could say the table is under the book. The difference is now the table is in focus and it's foregrounded, and the ground, where it is located, that's in the prepositional phrase. So if we adopt this, we can have a fairly simple prepositional phrase construction. And as I said throughout this presentation, the actual phrasal constructions are going to be slightly more complicated because of modifiers and other complexities. But for now, a simple representation of a prepositional phrase construction in English is the following. On the morphosyntactic level, you have a preposition followed by a noun phrase. And the meaning of the preposition is a spatial relationship between a figure and the ground. The ground is encoded by the prepositional complement, by the noun phrase, and the figure is again outside of this. And as you can see in A and B, in the examples above, the figure can either be the subject of a clause, or it can be a noun phrase, the book on the table, where the prepositional phrase is the post modifier. So, to put this kind of simply, the figure has to be somewhere close by, and if we wanted to encode it, we could say the prepositional phrases on the morphosyntactic level specify that they must be in clauses and that they refer to the subject or that they modify a noun. Summing up, phrases also have semantic meaning, and these are phrasal constructions. As you saw, the VP construction has a predicational meaning. NPs have a referential meaning. Prepositional phrases tell you something about figure and ground. So these are not just purely syntactic templates. At the same time, the specific meaning of what these entities do in a clausal construction depends largely on the argument structure slots of the argument structure constructions. Phrasal constructions are mostly used as fillers of argument structure constructions, that's NPs, or you can have adjuncts or modifiers, and that's NPs or PPs that fulfill this function, or adjective phrases and adverb phrases. Again, this is all slightly condensed and we would need to talk a lot more, but I think it gives you a good idea of the major types of phrases of English and how we can use this to analyze full sentences. Before we can get to the final part of this course where we do a full-fledged analysis of authentic constructs, of authentic utterances, we will need to look at clausal constructions. And that's what we shall do in the next session. Thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to seeing you again soon.